13 years ago, Jenny Morrison, a 35-year-old White House administrative coordinator, vanished without a trace after leaving her office in the West Wing on a cold February evening in 2004. Her disappearance plunged her family into an abyss of despair and sent shockwaves through the tight-knit community of federal employees who called the nation's capital home. The investigation that followed would expose cracks in the very foundation of American security, leaving more questions than answers and a family desperately clinging to hope in the face of institutional indifference. Before we continue, subscribe and hit the bell. Here we reopen cold cases with respect and proof. The last person to see Jenny alive was her closest friend and colleague, Sarah Chen, a fellow administrative coordinator who had worked alongside Jenny for over 6 years. February 18, 2004, started like any other winter day in Washington. The White House corridors buzzed with the usual urgency that defined the Bush administration's second-term preparations. Jenny arrived at 7:30 a.m. sharp, as she had every weekday for the past decade, carrying her signature lavender thermos and wearing the pearl earrings her late mother had given her. Sarah remembers that Jenny seemed different that Tuesday morning. Not nervous exactly, but carrying herself with a weight that hadn't been there the week before. During their shared coffee break at 10:15 a.m., Jenny had mentioned something that would haunt Sarah for years to come. "Sometimes I wonder if we really know what goes on behind these walls, Sarah. Sometimes I think we're all just expendable." The words felt strange coming from Jenny, who had always been the eternal optimist, the one who believed in the system, who felt honored to serve her country, even in an administrative capacity. She had worked her way up from a secretary position to become one of the most trusted coordinators in the West Wing, handling sensitive scheduling and document management for senior staff members. That afternoon, Jenny was tasked with organizing classified briefing materials for a meeting scheduled for the following week. The documents dealt with intelligence assessments related to the ongoing Iraq War, routine work for someone of her clearance level, but Sarah noticed Jenny spending an unusual amount of time reviewing certain files. When Sarah asked if everything was all right, Jenny simply smiled that practiced Washington smile and said, "Just making sure everything's perfect." At 6:47 p.m., security cameras captured Jenny leaving through the Northwest Gate, her usual exit point. She was alone, walking briskly toward the metro station on Farragut West, just as she had done thousands of times before. She wore her navy blue wool coat, carried her black leather briefcase, and seemed to be talking on her cell phone. The grainy footage shows her disappearing around the corner of 17th Street, and that was the last anyone would see of Jenny Morrison for 13 long years. By 9 p.m., when Jenny failed to call her elderly father as she did every evening without exception, the alarm bells began to ring. Her father, retired Marine Colonel William Morrison, immediately contacted the D.C. Metropolitan Police. By midnight, when Jenny's car was found abandoned in the parking lot of a 24-hour diner in Arlington, keys still in the ignition, purse untouched on the passenger seat, the investigation officially began. The police treated it as a missing person case initially, but the White House connection elevated it quickly to federal jurisdiction. The FBI took over within 48 hours, interviewing Jenny's colleagues, friends, and family members with the methodical precision that high-profile cases demand. They found no evidence of foul play, no signs of struggle, no ransom demands, no digital trail leading anywhere meaningful. Jenny had simply vanished, as if the earth had opened up and swallowed her whole, leaving behind only questions, theories, and a growing sense that something far more sinister than a random crime had taken place in the shadow of America's most powerful building. The FBI's initial response to Jenny Morrison's disappearance was swift and comprehensive, reflecting the gravity of a White House employee vanishing under mysterious circumstances. Special Agent Marcus Rodriguez, a 20-year veteran of the Bureau with extensive experience in counterintelligence cases, was assigned as the lead investigator. Within 72 hours of Jenny being reported missing, a task force of 12 agents was assembled, treating the case with the urgency typically reserved for matters of national security. The investigation revealed a woman whose life seemed to contradict the mystery of her disappearance. Jenny Morrison lived a remarkably stable and predictable existence. She rented a modest one-bedroom apartment in DuPont Circle, had $23,000 in her checking account, no significant debts beyond a small student loan, and maintained the same daily routines with almost military precision. Her credit cards showed no unusual activity in the weeks leading up to her disappearance, and her phone records revealed nothing more suspicious than conversations with her father, Sarah, and a few other close friends. But as the investigation deepened, inconsistencies began to emerge. Jenny's computer hard drive at the White House showed that she had accessed certain classified databases in the weeks before her disappearance, databases that weren't strictly within her purview, though her security clearance technically allowed the access. More troubling was the discovery that she had printed several documents on February 16th and 17th, documents that couldn't be accounted for in any official filing system. Sarah Chen found herself at the center of the FBI's scrutiny, subjected to multiple interviews that grew increasingly intense as weeks passed without progress. She told investigators about Jenny's unusual behavior in those final weeks, about conversations that seemed to hint at deeper concerns about the administration's handling of intelligence reports. Sarah remembered Jenny mentioning discrepancies in casualty reports from Iraq, numbers that didn't match between different government agencies. She started staying late more often, Sarah recalled during her third FBI interview. Jenny was always thorough, but in those last few weeks, she was almost obsessive about cross-referencing information. She'd compare Pentagon reports with CIA assessments, State Department cables with NSC briefings. When I asked her why, she said she was just trying to understand the full picture. The FBI's Behavioral Analysis Unit constructed a profile that painted Jenny as a meticulous, patriotic individual who took her responsibilities seriously, perhaps too seriously. They theorized that she might have uncovered information that conflicted with her moral compass, leading to psychological stress that could have resulted in a voluntary disappearance. But this theory fell apart when investigators examined her personal relationships and found no evidence of the kind of mental distress typically associated with such dramatic life changes. Colonel Morrison, Jenny's father, became increasingly frustrated with what he perceived as the FBI's incompetence. A man accustomed to military efficiency and clear chains of command, he couldn't comprehend how his daughter could simply vanish in one of the most surveilled cities in America. He hired private investigator Elena Vasquez, a former Secret Service agent with connections throughout Washington's security apparatus. Vasquez's independent investigation uncovered details that the FBI seemed to have overlooked or dismissed. She discovered that Jenny had made several unusual phone calls to a Washington Post journalist named David Kellerman in the weeks before her disappearance. When Vasquez contacted Kellerman, he claimed he had no recollection of speaking with Jenny Morrison and seemed genuinely puzzled by the suggestion. More significantly, Vasquez's review of security footage from various locations around Washington revealed something the FBI had missed. Jenny had been followed on at least 3 occasions in the week before her disappearance. The same dark sedan appeared in multiple locations where Jenny had been, always maintaining a discreet distance, always with tinted windows that obscured the driver's identity. 6 months into the investigation, with no concrete leads and mounting pressure to allocate resources to other cases, the FBI began to scale back their efforts. The official line remained that Jenny Morrison's disappearance was being actively investigated, but Sarah Chen could see the writing on the wall. The case was going cold, joining the thousands of other missing person files that gathered dust in federal databases. The last significant development came in December 2004, when a maintenance worker at a Maryland landfill found Jenny's briefcase, battered and water-damaged, buried under months of refuse. Inside were her White House ID badge, her Metro card, and $347 in cash. Everything that should have been there, except for any documents or files that might have explained her disappearance. The FBI processed the briefcase for forensic evidence, but found nothing useful. Too much time had passed. Too much contamination had occurred. By early 2005, exactly 1 year after Jenny's disappearance, the case was quietly transferred to the FBI's Cold Case Division, where it would remain dormant for the next 12 years. The transition from active investigation to cold case file was devastating for everyone who had known and loved Jenny Morrison. Her father, Colonel Morrison, aged visibly in those first few years, his military bearing gradually giving way to the stooped shoulders of a man carrying unbearable weight. He continued to call the FBI monthly, then weekly, then daily, until the agent stopped returning his calls altogether. The message was clear. The government had moved on from Jenny Morrison, but Sarah Chen refused to accept that silence. She had made a promise to herself the day Jenny disappeared. A promise that she would never stop looking, never stop asking questions, never let her best friend become just another statistic in the federal bureaucracy's filing system. What Sarah didn't realize was that this promise would transform her from a quiet administrative coordinator into something far more dangerous to certain powerful people, a relentless amateur investigator with insider access and nothing left to lose. In the months following the FBI's retreat from the case, Sarah began conducting her own investigation during lunch breaks, weekends, and vacation days. She created a detailed timeline of Jenny's final weeks, mapped out every location Jenny had visited, and methodically contacted every person Jenny had spoken with in those crucial days before her disappearance. The White House Security Office grew suspicious of Sarah's activities, but her grief was so evident, her dedication so genuine, that supervisors chose to treat her obsession as a harmless coping mechanism rather than a security concern. Sarah's investigation revealed patterns that the FBI had either missed or chosen to ignore. She discovered that Jenny wasn't the only White House employee to have accessed those controversial databases in early 2004. 3 other staff members with similar security clearances had also been reviewing intelligence reports from Iraq, cross-referencing casualty figures, and questioning discrepancies between different agencies' assessments. 2 of those employees had requested transfers to other departments within months of Jenny's disappearance. The 3rd had resigned entirely, citing personal reasons, and moving to Oregon, where he worked as a high school history teacher. Sarah managed to contact Michael Torres, the former White House analyst who had moved to Oregon. During a carefully worded phone conversation, Torres confirmed that he and several colleagues had been concerned about inconsistencies in intelligence reports. He wouldn't elaborate over the phone, but his silence spoke volumes. When Sarah suggested meeting in person, Torres became agitated and ended the call abruptly. A week later, Sarah learned that Torres had died in a single-car accident on a rural Oregon highway. The years between 2006 and 2012 were marked by Sarah's increasingly sophisticated investigation techniques and her growing paranoia about her own safety. She learned to use encrypted communications, to vary her daily routines, and to document everything she discovered in multiple hidden locations. She also learned to be patient, understanding that the truth about Jenny's disappearance was buried under layers of institutional secrecy that would require time and careful strategy to penetrate. During this period, Sarah made contact with other families of missing federal employees, discovering a network of grief-stricken relatives who shared suspicions about government cover-ups and systematic silencing of whistleblowers. Through these connections, she learned about similar cases: a Department of Defense analyst who had disappeared in 2003 after questioning pre-war intelligence, a State Department translator who had vanished in 2005 after expressing concerns about diplomatic communications, a CIA contractor who had gone missing in 2007 after accessing unauthorized databases. The pattern was becoming clear to Sarah, even if she couldn't yet prove it. Jenny Morrison hadn't been the victim of a random crime or a personal crisis. She had been eliminated because she had discovered something that threatened powerful interests, something so dangerous that it justified making a patriotic American woman disappear without a trace. In 2013, Sarah's investigation took an unexpected turn when she received an anonymous email containing a single sentence: "The answer to your questions is in Arlington, Section 60, grave marker 8847A. Arlington National Cemetery's Section 60 was reserved for veterans of the Iraq and Afghanistan wars. Grave marker 8847A belonged to Staff Sergeant Michael Chen, no relation to Sarah despite the shared surname, who had died in Fallujah in 2004, just 3 weeks after Jenny Morrison's disappearance. Sarah's investigation into Staff Sergeant Chen's death revealed that he had been responsible for compiling casualty reports from forward operating bases in Iraq, the same reports that Jenny had been reviewing in her final weeks at the White House. The connection seemed too significant to be coincidental, but Sarah couldn't determine how a dead soldier in Iraq connected to her missing friend in Washington. The breakthrough wouldn't come for another 4 years, but Sarah's patient investigation had laid the groundwork for a revelation that would shake the foundations of American intelligence services and finally provide answers to questions that had haunted her for more than a decade. If this case has already gripped you, hit the like button. It helps Jenny Morrison's story reach more people. By 2014, 10 years after Jenny Morrison's disappearance, Sarah Chen had evolved from a grieving friend into something far more formidable, a meticulous investigator with a decade of experience in navigating the dark corners of Washington's intelligence community. Her apartment in Georgetown had been transformed into a makeshift command center, with walls covered in timelines, photographs, and connecting strings that would have made any FBI profiler proud. But it was her mastery of digital investigation techniques that would finally crack open the first real lead in Jenny's case. Sarah had taught herself advanced computer skills out of necessity, learning to navigate encrypted networks, trace digital footprints, and recover deleted files with the dedication of someone whose life depended on it. She had also cultivated relationships with former intelligence analysts, disillusioned journalists, and government contractors who shared her skepticism about official narratives. This network of sources had provided her with insights that the FBI's investigation had either missed or deliberately ignored. The breakthrough came through an unexpected source. Dr. Rachel Martinez, a former NSA cryptologist who had left the agency in 2008, citing ethical concerns about domestic surveillance programs. Sarah had met Martinez at a conference for families of missing federal employees, and the two women had maintained contact over the years. In March 2014, Martinez contacted Sarah with information that would change everything. "I've been thinking about your friend Jenny," Martinez said during a carefully orchestrated meeting at a coffee shop in Alexandria. "The timing of her disappearance, the files she was accessing, the way the investigation was handled, it all fits a pattern I recognized from my time at NSA. There was a program, highly classified, designed to identify potential whistleblowers before they could cause damage to ongoing operations." Martinez explained that the program, codenamed Canary Trap, used sophisticated algorithms to analyze federal employees' computer activity, looking for patterns that might indicate someone was preparing to leak classified information. Employees who accessed files outside their normal scope, who spent unusual amounts of time reviewing sensitive documents, or who showed interest in discrepancies between official reports, would be flagged for closer surveillance. If Jenny had been flagged by Canary Trap, Martinez continued, she would have been placed under immediate surveillance by a joint task force that included elements from multiple agencies. These weren't regular FBI agents. They were specialists in what the intelligence community euphemistically calls problem resolution. Sarah felt her blood run cold as Martinez described how the program worked. The dark sedan that had followed Jenny, the quick dismissal of the FBI investigation, the convenient disappearance of other employees who had been asking similar questions, it all made terrible sense when viewed through the lens of a systematic program designed to protect government secrets at any cost. Martinez provided Sarah with something invaluable, the name of a former contractor who had worked on the Canary Trap program. James Whitfield had been a senior systems analyst for a private intelligence firm called Meridian Solutions, which held classified contracts with multiple government agencies. Whitfield had left Meridian in 2009 and had been living quietly in rural Virginia, working as a freelance IT consultant for small businesses. Finding Whitfield required all of Sarah's investigative skills, but she eventually tracked him to a small town outside Charlottesville. Their initial contact was tense. Whitfield was paranoid about his former employers and suspicious of anyone asking questions about his past work, but Sarah's persistence and detailed knowledge of Jenny's case eventually convinced him that she wasn't a government agent trying to trap him. Whitfield's revelations were more disturbing than Sarah had imagined. He confirmed that Canary Trap had been operational during 2003 and 2004, and that several White House employees had been flagged for suspicious computer activity. He couldn't access the specific files that would prove Jenny had been targeted, but he provided Sarah with something almost as valuable: the technical specifications for the surveillance equipment that had been used to monitor flagged employees. "They didn't just watch their computer activity," Whitfield explained during a series of secret meetings throughout the summer of 2014. "They monitored everything: phone calls, emails, physical movements, even personal relationships. If someone was flagged by the system, they would know within hours. If that person was planning to contact a journalist, a member of Congress, or anyone else who might be interested in their information." Most chillingly, Whitfield revealed that the program included intervention protocols for cases where monitoring wasn't sufficient to prevent a potential leak. These protocols were deliberately vague, but the implication was clear. Employees who posed too great a risk to ongoing operations could be permanently neutralized. Sarah pressed Whitfield for more specific information about Jenny's case, but he claimed that individual case files were compartmentalized beyond his access level. However, he did provide her with a crucial piece of information: the location of a safe house in Maryland, where Meridian Solutions had conducted specialized interrogations of security risks. The safe house was a nondescript farmhouse outside Frederick, Maryland, surrounded by 50 acres of woodland that provided complete isolation from prying eyes. Public records showed that the property had been purchased in 2002 by a shell company that traced back to Meridian Solutions, though the connection required sophisticated financial investigation to uncover. Sarah spent weeks conducting surveillance of the property, learning that it appeared abandoned but was maintained by a groundskeeping service that arrived monthly to maintain the exterior. Security cameras were positioned throughout the property, suggesting that it was still being monitored, despite its apparent disuse. In November 2014, Sarah made a decision that she knew could cost her life. She would break into the safe house and search for evidence of what had happened to Jenny Morrison and the other missing federal employees. She spent months planning the operation, acquiring night vision equipment, learning lockpicking techniques, and studying the property's security systems. On a moonless night in February 2015, exactly 11 years after Jenny's disappearance, Sarah Chen transformed from investigator into something far more dangerous: a woman with nothing left to lose who was determined to uncover the truth, regardless of the consequences. The break-in at the Meridian Solutions safe house was Sarah Chen's most dangerous gamble in 11 years of investigation, but it would prove to be the key that finally unlocked the truth about Jenny Morrison's disappearance. Sarah had spent 4 months preparing for this moment, studying the property's routines, mapping security vulnerabilities, and acquiring the specialized equipment she would need to penetrate what was essentially a government black site. February 18, 2015, exactly 11 years to the day after Jenny vanished, Sarah approached the farmhouse through the dense woodland that surrounded the property. She had chosen the anniversary date deliberately, treating it as both a memorial to her lost friend and a symbolic confrontation with the forces that had silenced her. The night was bitterly cold, with snow muffling her footsteps as she navigated toward the building, using night vision goggles purchased from a military surplus dealer. The exterior security was sophisticated, but not impenetrable. Sarah had observed that the motion sensors were positioned to detect approach from the main access road, but the woodland approach had blind spots that a careful infiltrator could exploit. She had also discovered that the security system was monitored remotely rather than on site, meaning that she would have a window of time to work before any response team could arrive. Breaking into the farmhouse required skills that Sarah had never imagined she would need. She had practiced lockpicking for months, studied alarm system schematics, and learned techniques for bypassing electronic security measures. The rear entrance yielded to her efforts after 20 minutes of careful work, and Sarah found herself inside a building that looked nothing like a normal farmhouse. The interior had been completely renovated to serve as a specialized facility. The main floor contained what appeared to be interview rooms, each equipped with recording equipment, one-way mirrors, and restraint systems that made Sarah's blood run cold. The basement had been converted into holding cells, each one soundproofed and equipped with the kind of monitoring equipment used in maximum security prisons. But it was the third floor that contained the information Sarah had been seeking for over a decade. What had once been the farmhouse's attic had been converted into a record storage area, with filing cabinets containing documentation of the facility's activities from 2002 through 2009. Sarah's hands trembled as she photographed file after file, using a specially modified camera that could capture documents in low light without using a flash. The files revealed the scope of the Canary Trap program and its associated intervention protocols. Over 7 years, the program had identified 347 federal employees as potential security risks. Of these, 52 had been subjected to enhanced monitoring, 23 had been brought to the safe house for comprehensive debriefing, and 11 had been classified as requiring permanent resolution. Jenny Morrison's file was extensive and heartbreaking. The surveillance had begun in January 2004, when her computer activity triggered the Canary Trap algorithms. The file contained photographs of Jenny taken without her knowledge, transcripts of her phone conversations, and detailed analysis of her emotional state and potential vulnerability to recruitment by foreign intelligence services. More disturbing were the assessments of Jenny's personality and motivations. The analysts had correctly identified her as a patriotic American who was troubled by discrepancies in intelligence reports, but they had misinterpreted her concerns as potential disloyalty rather than genuine patriotism. The file concluded that Jenny Morrison posed an unacceptable risk to ongoing intelligence operations and recommended immediate intervention to prevent compromise of classified programs. The intervention had been planned with military precision. Jenny was to be approached on her way home from work on February 18, 2004, and transported to the safe house for interrogation. The file contained detailed plans for her questioning, psychological pressure techniques to be employed, and contingency plans for various scenarios depending on her level of cooperation. Sarah found what she had been looking for in the final section of Jenny's file: documentation of what had actually happened during her friend's final hours. Jenny had been intercepted near the Farragut West Metro station by a four-person team posing as federal agents. She had been told that she was needed for an urgent briefing related to national security and had willingly accompanied them to the safe house. The interrogation transcripts were almost unbearable to read. Jenny had maintained her innocence and patriotism even under extreme psychological pressure, insisting that she had been trying to help the government by identifying errors in intelligence reports. Her interrogators had been convinced that she was planning to leak information to journalists, despite her repeated denials. The file's conclusion was written in the clinical language of professional killers. Subject remained non-compliant, despite 72 hours of enhanced interrogation. Risk assessment indicates continued threat to operational security. Permanent resolution authorized and implemented on February 21, 2004. Disposal completed according to established protocols. Sarah had finally found the truth she had been seeking for 11 years, but it was more horrible than anything she had imagined. Jenny Morrison had been murdered by her own government for the crime of being a conscientious employee who cared too much about accuracy and truth. She had been killed not by foreign enemies or criminal conspirators, but by the very institution she had served with dedication and pride. The remaining files revealed the fates of other employees who had been subjected to permanent resolution. Their bodies had been disposed of using methods that ensured they would never be found: chemical dissolution, cremation in industrial furnaces, burial in remote locations that were subsequently developed into shopping centers or office buildings. As Sarah photographed the final documents in Jenny's file, she heard the sound that had haunted her nightmares for months: vehicles approaching the safe house. Her preparation had paid off. She had planned multiple escape routes and had positioned equipment to aid in a rapid departure. But as she gathered her evidence and prepared to flee, Sarah Chen knew that her life had fundamentally changed. She was no longer just an investigator seeking answers. She was now a witness to government murder, who possessed evidence that powerful people would kill to suppress. If this case has already gripped you, leave a like. It helps Jenny Morrison's story reach more people. Sarah Chen's escape from the Meridian Solutions safe house marked the beginning of the most dangerous phase of her 13-year investigation. As she fled through the Maryland woodland with digital evidence of government-sanctioned murder, she knew that she had crossed a line from which there could be no return. The same forces that had eliminated Jenny Morrison and at least 10 other federal employees would now be focused on silencing her, and Sarah understood that her survival depended on staying ahead of adversaries who possessed unlimited resources and legal authority. The immediate aftermath of the break-in was a masterclass in operational security that Sarah had learned through years of paranoid preparation. She had anticipated that accessing the safe house would trigger a massive response, and she had spent months establishing the infrastructure necessary to disappear completely from her normal life. False identities, hidden cash reserves, secure communication channels, and safe houses of her own. Sarah had transformed herself into something resembling a professional intelligence operative. Within hours of her escape, Sarah's apartment in Georgetown was under surveillance by teams that she recognized as the same type of specialists who had eliminated Jenny. Her workplace at the White House was quietly informed that Sarah Chen had suffered a family emergency and would be taking extended leave, a cover story that bought precious time before her absence would trigger official inquiries. But Sarah was already gone, operating from the first of several prepared hideouts scattered throughout the mid-Atlantic region. The evidence Sarah had collected from the safe house was more than just documentation of past crimes. It was a blueprint for an ongoing program that continued to operate throughout the federal government. The files revealed that Canary Trap had evolved since 2004, expanding its surveillance capabilities and refining its intervention protocols based on lessons learned from cases like Jenny Morrison's. More disturbing was the discovery that the program had corporate sponsors, defense contractors, intelligence firms, and multinational corporations that had financial interests in maintaining certain classified programs. The permanent resolution of troublesome federal employees wasn't just about protecting national security. It was about protecting billions of dollars in contracts and maintaining the flow of classified information that kept certain companies profitable. Sarah's analysis of the files revealed names, dates, and locations that painted a picture of systematic assassination spanning more than a decade, but she also recognized that possessing this information made her the most wanted person in America by agencies that operated outside normal legal constraints. Every digital communication she made, every financial transaction, every movement through public spaces carried the risk of triggering the same surveillance systems that had doomed Jenny Morrison. The psychological toll of living as a fugitive while processing evidence of her best friend's murder pushed Sarah to the edge of emotional collapse. She had spent 11 years seeking answers, but the truth was more devastating than anything she had imagined. Jenny hadn't been killed by foreign agents or criminal conspirators. She had been murdered by the same government she had served with dedication, by colleagues who had decided that her commitment to truth made her expendable. But Sarah's grief was tempered by a growing sense of purpose that transcended personal revenge. The files she had obtained documented a systematic program of murder that violated every principle of democratic government. If she could expose the truth about Canary Trap and its intervention protocols, she could prevent future victims and honor the memory of Jenny Morrison and the others who had been silenced. The challenge was finding someone with the courage and credibility to publish her evidence. The mainstream media had proven unreliable when it came to challenging government narratives, and Sarah had learned to distrust journalists who claimed to be interested in her story. She needed someone with impeccable credentials, established credibility with intelligence sources, and the institutional backing necessary to withstand the inevitable government pressure that would follow publication. Her search led her to Marcus Thompson, a Pulitzer Prize-winning investigative journalist who had spent 15 years covering intelligence community abuses for The Washington Post. Thompson had a reputation for meticulous fact-checking and had survived multiple attempts by government agencies to discredit his reporting. More importantly, he had developed sources throughout the intelligence community who could verify the authenticity of classified documents. Making contact with Thompson required elaborate security precautions that reflected Sarah's transformation from amateur investigator to professional operative. She used encrypted communications, multiple intermediaries, and counter-surveillance techniques to arrange a meeting that would be invisible to the monitoring systems that were undoubtedly searching for her. The initial meeting took place in a suburban bookstore in Richmond, Virginia, chosen because its location and layout provided multiple escape routes while offering enough ambient noise to defeat electronic surveillance. Thompson's reaction to Sarah's evidence was exactly what she had hoped for. Professional skepticism followed by growing excitement as he recognized the significance of what she had uncovered. "This is bigger than Watergate," Thompson said, after spending 2 hours reviewing Sarah's photographs and documentation. "If these files are authentic, and my initial assessment suggests they are, you've uncovered evidence of a systematic program of political assassination that spans multiple administrations. This isn't just about your friend Jenny. This is about the fundamental nature of American democracy." But Thompson also understood the dangers that Sarah faced and the challenges they would encounter in bringing the story to publication. "The government will deny everything, claim the documents are fabricated, and launch a comprehensive effort to discredit both of us," he warned. "We need additional corroboration, technical analysis to prove authenticity, and ironclad security to prevent them from suppressing the story before publication." The collaboration between Sarah Chen and Marcus Thompson that began in that Richmond bookstore would ultimately expose one of the most significant intelligence scandals in American history. But it would also trigger a government response that would test both of their commitments to truth and democracy, as forces within the intelligence community mobilized to protect secrets that had been maintained through murder for more than a decade. The 18 months following Sarah Chen's first meeting with Marcus Thompson represented the most intensive investigative journalism project in the Washington Post's history. What began as the story of one woman's search for her missing friend had evolved into an exposé of systematic government assassination that would ultimately bring down an entire shadow network within the American intelligence community. Thompson assembled a team of 12 journalists, each specializing in different aspects of the investigation: government contracts, intelligence operations, digital forensics, and legal analysis. The Post's editor-in-chief, Patricia Williams, made the unprecedented decision to dedicate unlimited resources to the story, understanding that they were confronting forces that would stop at nothing to prevent publication. The technical authentication of Sarah's evidence required months of painstaking analysis. Digital forensics experts confirmed that the documents were genuine, created on government systems using classified formatting protocols that would be impossible to fake. Handwriting analysts verified signatures on authorization documents, while former intelligence officials provided context that confirmed the operational details described in the files. But the most compelling corroboration came from an unexpected source: Dr. Rachel Martinez, the former NSA cryptologist who had first introduced Sarah to the concept of the Canary Trap program. Martinez had maintained contact with former colleagues throughout the intelligence community, and Thompson's investigation had convinced several of them to speak anonymously about programs they had witnessed or participated in. "We all knew something was wrong," explained a former CIA analyst who spoke on condition of anonymity. "Too many good people were disappearing, asking the right questions, and then just gone. We told ourselves they had been reassigned, taken new jobs, decided to leave government service. But deep down, we knew something darker was happening." The breakthrough that transformed Thompson's investigation from journalism into judicial action came through an unexpected alliance with FBI Special Agent Elena Rodriguez, no relation to the Marcus Rodriguez who had led the original investigation into Jenny's disappearance. Agent Rodriguez had been investigating financial irregularities at Meridian Solutions for 2 years as part of a corruption probe, and Thompson's evidence provided the missing pieces that connected corporate fraud to systematic murder. "When Mr. Thompson showed me those files," Rodriguez later testified, "I realized that we hadn't been investigating financial crimes. We had been tracking a murder conspiracy that involved elements of our own government. It was the most disturbing moment of my 20-year career with the Bureau." Agent Rodriguez's official investigation provided the legal framework necessary for the Washington Post to publish Thompson's findings without facing immediate government suppression. By March 2017, federal prosecutors had opened grand jury proceedings targeting 17 current and former government officials, 12 corporate executives, and the entire leadership structure of Meridian Solutions. The first article in what would become known as the Morrison Files series was published on April 3, 2017, 13 years and 6 weeks after Jenny Morrison's disappearance. The headline read simply, "The Canary Trap: How the U.S. Government Murdered Its Own Employees." The impact was immediate and devastating. Within hours of publication, Sarah Chen's story had been shared more than 2 million times on social media platforms. Government officials who had been named in the investigation were placed on administrative leave pending criminal charges. The stock prices of defense contractors connected to Meridian Solutions collapsed as investors fled positions in companies associated with systematic murder. But the government's response was swift and predictable. Intelligence officials held emergency briefings, claiming that the documents were fabricated by foreign adversaries seeking to undermine American security operations. Congressional allies of the intelligence community demanded investigations into how classified materials had been obtained and published. Legal challenges were filed, seeking to prevent further publication of the series. The personal cost to Sarah Chen and Marcus Thompson was severe. Both were subjected to round-the-clock surveillance. Their financial accounts were frozen pending national security investigations, and their families received anonymous threats that forced them into protective custody. Sarah, who had been living in hiding for nearly 2 years, found herself under federal protection, as both a witness to murder and a target for elimination. "They want to make this about leaks and national security," Thompson said during a nationally televised interview defending his reporting. "But this isn't about protecting legitimate intelligence operations. This is about covering up the systematic murder of American citizens who dared to question their own government." The political implications of the Morrison files extended far beyond the intelligence community. The revelations triggered congressional hearings, Inspector General investigations, and calls for a special prosecutor to investigate government-sanctioned assassination programs. Public trust in federal institutions, already damaged by decades of surveillance scandals, reached historic lows as Americans grappled with evidence that their government had been murdering patriotic citizens. Most significantly for Sarah Chen, the publication of Thompson's investigation finally provided official acknowledgement of what had happened to Jenny Morrison. The FBI reopened her case as a homicide investigation, focusing on the officials and contractors who had been identified in the Safe House files. After 13 years of government denials and institutional indifference, Jenny Morrison's murder was finally being treated as the crime it had always been. The first arrests came within weeks of publication, as federal prosecutors moved quickly to prevent evidence destruction and witness intimidation. James Whitfield, the former Meridian Solutions contractor who had helped Sarah understand the Canary Trap program, emerged from hiding to testify before federal grand juries. His cooperation provided additional evidence that corroborated Sarah's findings and identified dozens of additional victims. But even as justice seemed within reach, Sarah Chen understood that her 13-year journey was approaching its most dangerous phase. The forces that had eliminated Jenny Morrison and so many others were fighting for their survival, and they possessed resources and connections that extended throughout the highest levels of government. The battle for truth and accountability was far from over. The criminal trials that followed the publication of the Morrison files represented the most significant prosecution of government officials in American history since Watergate. By the summer of 2017, federal prosecutors had secured indictments against 43 defendants, ranging from senior intelligence officials to corporate executives to the operational teams that had carried out the actual murders. Sarah Chen found herself at the center of a legal proceeding that transformed her from investigator to star witness, her testimony becoming the foundation for prosecutions that would ultimately send 17 people to federal prison for life. The emotional toll of reliving Jenny's final days in courtroom after courtroom was devastating, but Sarah understood that her friend's memory demanded nothing less than complete accountability for those who had destroyed so many lives. The lead prosecutor, Assistant U.S. Attorney Catherine Walsh, built her case around the systematic nature of the Canary Trap program and its intervention protocols. This wasn't about national security, Walsh argued during her opening statement in the trial of former Meridian Solutions CEO Richard Blackwood. This was about corporate profits protected through systematic murder, facilitated by corrupt government officials who betrayed their oaths to the Constitution. The evidence Sarah had recovered from the Safe House proved to be legally devastating. Document after document demonstrated the cold calculation behind each killing, the bureaucratic procedures that had been developed to identify and eliminate security risks, and the corporate financial incentives that had motivated the murders. Jury members were visibly shaken as they reviewed files documenting the deaths of patriots who had been killed for loving their country too much to ignore its mistakes. But the most powerful testimony came from unexpected sources, family members of other victims who had spent years searching for missing loved ones, never knowing that their relatives had been murdered by the same government they had served. Sarah's investigation had identified 17 confirmed victims of the intervention protocols, and the families of each victim were finally able to understand what had happened to their missing family members. Colonel William Morrison, Jenny's father, provided testimony that brought the courtroom to tears. The elderly Marine, now 78 years old and using a walker, described 13 years of unanswered questions and government indifference. "They killed my daughter for being a good American," he told the jury, his voice breaking with emotion. "They killed her for caring about the truth." The defense strategies employed by the various defendants revealed the moral corruption that had enabled the program to operate for so long. Some claimed they had been following orders from superiors who were protecting national security. Others argued that the victims had been legitimate security risks who threatened ongoing intelligence operations. A few attempted to shift blame to foreign adversaries who had supposedly infiltrated and manipulated the program. None of these arguments proved effective against the overwhelming evidence of premeditated murder for financial gain. The jury in the Blackwood trial deliberated for less than 6 hours before returning guilty verdicts on all charges, including conspiracy to commit murder, racketeering, and violations of civil rights under color of authority. Similar results followed in trial after trial throughout 2017 and early 2018. The civil litigation that accompanied the criminal trials provided additional vindication for the victims' families and further exposed the scope of the conspiracy. Sarah Chen filed a wrongful death lawsuit against the federal government on behalf of Colonel Morrison, seeking not just financial compensation, but official acknowledgement of the government's responsibility for Jenny's murder. The government's initial response to the civil litigation was to claim sovereign immunity and argue that intelligence operations were beyond judicial review. But the political pressure generated by the Morrison files reporting, combined with overwhelming evidence of criminal activity, forced the Justice Department to reverse course and negotiate settlements that included formal apologies and acknowledgement of government wrongdoing. The United States government acknowledges that Jennifer Morrison was unlawfully killed by individuals acting under color of federal authority, read the official settlement document signed in February 2018. Her death was not authorized by law and violated her constitutional rights as an American citizen. The government extends its deepest apologies to her family and commits to ensuring that such violations never occur again. The settlement also included provisions for memorializing the victims of the Canary Trap program and establishing oversight mechanisms designed to prevent similar abuses in the future. A monument to the 17 confirmed victims was erected in Arlington National Cemetery, not far from the grave of Staff Sergeant Michael Chen, whose death had provided Sarah with a crucial early clue in her investigation. But perhaps the most meaningful outcome of the entire ordeal was the personal closure that Sarah Chen finally achieved after 14 years of relentless investigation. Standing beside Colonel Morrison at Jenny's memorial service in March 2018, Sarah finally felt that she had fulfilled the promise she had made to her best friend on that terrible February day in 2004. Jenny always believed in the truth, Sarah said during her eulogy. She believed that America was strong enough to confront its mistakes and good enough to hold its leaders accountable. Today, 14 years after they silenced her voice, we know that she was right. The truth has won. The systemic changes that followed the Morrison Files revelations extended far beyond criminal prosecutions and civil settlements. Congressional oversight of intelligence operations was strengthened, whistleblower protections were enhanced, and new safeguards were established to prevent the emergence of assassination programs within the federal government. More importantly, the case established a precedent that even the most classified government operations must operate within constitutional constraints. The notion that national security could justify the murder of American citizens was definitively rejected by the courts, Congress, and the American people. 5 years after the publication of the Morrison Files, Sarah Chen stood in the headquarters of the Jennifer Morrison Foundation for Government Accountability, an organization she had established to prevent future victims of intelligence community abuses. The foundation's mission was simple but profound: to ensure that no American would ever again be murdered by their own government for the crime of patriotic conscience. The foundation's work had expanded far beyond Sarah's original focus on missing federal employees. Working with congressional oversight committees, inspector general offices, and civil rights organizations, the foundation had identified and exposed dozens of lesser abuses that might have escalated into systematic violence if left unchecked. The lesson of Jenny Morrison's case was clear. Democracy required eternal vigilance against those who would abuse power in the name of security. Sarah's personal transformation over the course of her 14-year investigation had been as dramatic as the institutional changes her work had produced. The quiet administrative coordinator who had lost her best friend in 2004 had evolved into one of the most respected government accountability advocates in the country. She testified regularly before Congress, consulted with oversight agencies, and provided guidance to families of missing federal employees who found themselves navigating the same nightmare she had endured. But the costs of her crusade for truth had been severe. Sarah had never married, never started the family she had once planned, never pursued the quiet life she had envisioned before Jenny's disappearance transformed her existence. The paranoia and hypervigilance that had kept her alive during her years as a fugitive investigator had never fully subsided, leaving her isolated, even in victory. "I sometimes wonder what my life would have been like if Jenny had never been taken from us," Sarah reflected during an interview marking the 15th anniversary of the disappearance. "But then I think about all the lives we've saved, all the families who won't have to endure what Colonel Morrison endured, and I know that Jenny would be proud of what we've accomplished in her memory." The criminal defendants in the Canary Trap cases had exhausted their appeals by 2022, with the Supreme Court declining to review convictions that the justices described as overwhelming, supported by evidence of systematic murder for financial gain. Richard Blackwood died in federal prison in 2021, taking to his grave secrets about other programs that might have operated alongside Canary Trap. Several other key figures had provided cooperation in exchange for reduced sentences, but the full scope of intelligence community abuses during the early 2000s would never be completely known. Colonel Morrison had not lived to see the final resolution of his daughter's case. He passed away peacefully in 2019, surrounded by family members who credited Sarah Chen with giving him the closure he needed to die in peace. His funeral was attended by hundreds of current and former government employees who understood that his daughter had died defending the principles they had all sworn to uphold. The political implications of the Morrison files continued to reverberate throughout the intelligence community years after the initial revelations. Reform legislation had restructured oversight mechanisms, enhanced whistleblower protections, and established new criminal penalties for officials who participated in assassination programs. But Sarah understood that institutional safeguards were only as strong as the people willing to defend them. "Every generation has to earn democracy anew," Sarah said during a speech at Georgetown University in 2023. Jenny Morrison earned it by refusing to ignore uncomfortable truths about her government. "We earn it by ensuring that her sacrifice leads to lasting change that protects future generations from the abuses she died exposing." The Jennifer Morrison Foundation had also established scholarship programs for students studying government accountability, journalism, and civil rights law. The scholars, known as Morrison Fellows, were required to spend one summer working on oversight projects with congressional committees, inspector general offices, or civil rights organizations. The program ensured that Jenny's commitment to truth and accountability would be carried forward by new generations of Americans. Sarah often visited Jenny's grave in Arlington National Cemetery, where her friend had finally been laid to rest alongside other patriots who had died in service to their country. The headstone bore a simple inscription that Sarah had chosen: Jennifer Morrison. She sought truth and found justice. Below those words was a quote from Thomas Jefferson that Jenny had often referenced: "The price of freedom is eternal vigilance." As Sarah stood beside that grave in the autumn of 2024, 20 years after Jenny's disappearance, she reflected on the journey that had consumed her adult life and transformed American democracy. The shy administrative coordinator, who had lost her best friend, had become a force for institutional change whose work would protect countless Americans she would never meet. "I kept my promise, Jenny," Sarah whispered to the marble headstone. "I never stopped looking, I never stopped fighting, and because of that others won't have to endure what we endured. You can rest now. The truth has won." The wind rustled through the autumn leaves as Sarah turned away from the grave, knowing that her work would continue as long as democracy required defenders. Jenny Morrison's legacy lived on, not just in the foundation that bore her name, but in every whistleblower who felt safe to speak truth to power, every oversight committee that held officials accountable, and every American who understood that their government must answer to the people it serves. The case of Jenny Morrison had begun with one woman's disappearance and ended with the transformation of American democracy itself. It was a reminder that even in the darkest moments, when institutional power seems insurmountable and truth appears buried forever, the persistence of ordinary citizens can move mountains and change history. Jenny Morrison had died for seeking truth. Sarah Chen had lived to ensure that truth would triumph, and America had proven itself worthy of citizens brave enough to demand accountability from those who would govern in their name. Subscribe to our channel to explore more cold cases and disturbing mysteries across America. Thank you for following Jenny Morrison's story. We'll see you in the next video.